We've talked about combining data from multiple Excel files a lot of times on this channel. But in this video, I'd like to talk about that in case you have a single Excel file which has got multiple sheets, then how do you combine the data from those multiple sheets in a single Excel file? To make this interesting and add a little twist to the case, what if the data of all the sheets is not in the first row and you have a couple of junk rows? How do you remove that from every single sheet and then combine the data? And you may not even want to combine the data from all the sheets in that Excel file. You may only want a few specific sheets that you would want to target. How do you then combine the data? And finally, the user also may want to pick up a certain few columns of the data from those sheets and not all the columns. And then how do you combine the data? Keeping all of these twists in mind, let's just take a look at how do we combine data from a single Excel file, but which has got multiple sheets. Let's start. All right, people, let's just take a look at the data first that we're working with, and let's just then start to form some logic to be able to get to the answer that we're looking at. So I'm working with this one single Excel file called data XLSX. And in this Excel file, I've got multiple sheets, 2008, 9, 10, a couple of junk sheets right here, and that's what we have. Now, if you take a look at the legit sheets that we have, you're going to see that in the 2008 sheet, we have the 2008 data. In the 9 sheet, we'll have 9 data, and 10 sheet, we'll have 10 data, so on and so forth. But there are a few junk rows up on the top that I'd like to remove before I combine the data. So these rows need to be gone. And if I take a look at 2009, you're going to see that here I somehow have like one empty row. And in 2009, I have no empty rows, but the data spilled into 3 sheets right here. And in 2010, I just have 2 junk rows up on the top and the data is all concatenated. The junk data is all concatenated in the first row. So how do we tackle this problem of removing unequal number of junk rows from the top of every single sheet is something that people take a look. Take a look at other sheets also that I want to discard when I'm doing my process. So sheet number 1 needs to be discarded. It's an empty sheet. Sheet number 2 needs to be discarded. And sheet number 3 contains a random pivot table that I also want to discard. So I'm only looking for 2008 through 2010. And additionally, I want to build an automation that in case 2011 comes in or 7 comes in, my formula or my automation should be able to pick up that sheet as well, should that be added later. In order for you to confidently replicate the solution in your own scenario, it's very important that you understand the logic that I'm trying to build. So let's just go over through the logic and then you'll be able to take the solution, make modifications and apply to your own case. Let's just start with the Excel file. So here is our Excel file that we have. In this Excel file, we have multiple sheets. So we have 8 sheet, we have 9 sheet, and we have 10 sheets, and there are a couple of other sheets as well which we do not really want. So our first job is going to be that get to the Excel file. That means connect to the Excel file, and that's my level 1 problem. So which is get to the file, right? Once we have gotten to the file, the next step is that we will build some sort of checking or some sort of filtering mechanism that leaves out the sheets that we do not really want to consider. So all of these junk files that we have, we would like to remove them from the consideration or the code that we're trying to build. And in level 2, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a filter that will remove all the files or all the sheets that we do not really need. That's part number 2. In part number 3, what we will do is we will start to work with the sheet level data. So that's when we will start to kind of work with this particular data, 8 data, 9 data, and 10 data. Now, if you think about it, the next thing that I would want to do is that because all of these sheets contain a bit of inconsistent data, my next logical step would be to pick up any particular sheet. Let's just say that I'm picking up 2009 sheet. So let's say this is the data for 2009, which has got a couple of junk rows up on the top. And that is where actually the good data starts. So this is where the good data starts. There are a couple of junk rows up on the top that I'd like to remove. The problem is that these junk rows are not consistent across multiple Excel files. So whatever work that I do, whatever code that I write will be applied to one single file. So this is the code that is going to apply to this particular sheet. I keep saying file, but it's a sheet. And once that code is dynamic, then this particular code that I have applied to only one sheet, which is 2009 sheet, is then going to be replicated to the other sheets as well. So I am going to take this code and I'm going to apply this code to the entire Excel file once again to all the sheets, which is 8 sheet, 9 sheet, and 10 sheet. And then this is going to remove obviously the junk rows from the top. And once the junk rows from the top are removed, I will then happily combine all the data from all the sheets and bring all of the data together in one single Excel file. That is going to be my logic of building this particular solution. Now, if any part of this logic is something that you do not really need, skip that or modify that in your own way and then build the solution in your own way. All right, let's just start with level 1 problem, which is where we are trying to connect to that Excel file which has got data in multiple sheets. I've closed that file. I'm in a blank Excel workbook, and that's where I will start to work on my data. So I will go to my data tab. I'll say get data from file from an Excel workbook. This is one way of pointing to that workbook, but sure enough, we are trying to learn a bit of M code here, and I'll be very glad to take you through the M code as well. So let's just launch a blank query. So I'm just going to go over to the other sources and create a blank query. The query that I'm going to write from scratch is also going to lead us to the exact same output that you could have got by the user interface as well. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this particular query as, let's say, combine data. And in the formula bar, I'm going to write the code, which is a file.contents, start the bracket. Then it asks you, hey, what's the path of that particular Excel file? Now, I can obviously go to that folder, which is my Excel file folder, which is the blank folder. And here is where I have the data XLSX file. Now, in order for me to copy the path very, very fast, I can shift right click on this particular file name. In the shift right click menu, I can see that I have something called as copy path. Where is that? Copy as path. I can click on that, and then I can just take that path and put that path right here. It automatically comes in the inverted commas. Now, once you stick that path inside the file.contents, Power Query automatically recognizes that what you were trying to work with was an Excel file, so it wraps the Excel.workbook function around that, and that is so cool. And this is what you would have landed onto in case you were picking up the data from get data from file from an Excel workbook. Now, this is our level 1. We have been able to connect to that file, and once we have been able to connect to that file, now it's the time to move to level number 2, which is where we can see all the data of all the sheets in the tables right here. But before we start to do any kind of work, I would like to discard all of these junk sheets that I have dynamically, so that in case any further sheet gets added, let's say 2011 data comes in or 7 data comes in, that should be added automatically, but not any junk sheet. To be able to remove all the sheets which contain text, my assumption is that every single sheet which is legit and the sheet that I would want to work on is going to be a numeric like 2008 or 9 or 10. Anything which is not a number is going to be the sheet that I would like to discard. That's my assumption that I'm trying to make. So all of these sheets which are text names of the sheets, I would like to discard. Now, one of the ways to do that is to convert this into a number. So I'll just convert this into, let's say, a decimal number. Sure enough, I get left with the legit sheets, I get errors, and I can say remove errors. But this leaves me with this particular step, change type, and then I'll have to do one more step to kind of remove the errors from this. Can we do all of this in one single step? Sure enough, we can. Let's just take a look at that. To be able to do this, I'm going to use a filter formula function, which is table.selectRows, which is nothing but synonymous to the filter function in Power Query. So I'll say table.selectRows. And the table.selectRows, I have to feed a table. That means what table I'm trying to work with. I'm trying to work with this particular table, which is in the source tab, which is the table that you're taking a look at right here. In this table, I would like to go to the name column, and in the name column, I will try converting 8, 9, and 10 into numbers. If they do convert it into numbers, keep them. If they do not convert it into numbers, remove them. As simple as that. That's the logic that I'm trying to write. So what's the exact logic that I write? So I'll say, hey, why don't you go in every single row of the name column? So each name is going to allow me to go in every single row of the name column. And then what I want to do is I want to try converting the name column into a number. So I'll say number.from, try converting that into a number, and close that bracket and press enter. Now at the moment, the try is going to give you a record, and the record is going to have fields which is has error field. Now I'll just go ahead. This gives me an error. That is fine. If I just maybe wrap this around in the square brackets right here, and if I just maybe go ahead and say something like has error, so has error, which is a field which gets created in case the row returned an error, which is a true and false, you're going to see that I am actually left with all the sheets which do not have the error. And this is like, say, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, but I want to reverse the logic, so I will just write a not at the start. That means I should be keeping those sheets that are numbers only. So You can see that 2008, 9 and 10, they don't have an errors, and therefore I am keeping those sheets and the rest of the sheets are removed. This is fantastic. In case you're liking the video thus far, you're going to absolutely love my courses on Power Query, DAX, data modeling, and especially the M language, which is where I break down very complicated concepts around data cleaning and ETL, and then trying to help you understand that how do you build or how do you frame logic to be able to build your solution on your own data. These are extremely structured courses, which is where I take students right from scratch, build up the fundamentals, and then we go on start talking about more advanced, more complicated problems. Hundreds of students have joined my courses and they have left some raving feedback about the course. In case you're interested to take your skills to the next level, I'll highly encourage that you take a look at the courses and they will be super beneficial. Thanks so much. This is the data that I would like to keep from all of the sheets. And now we move on to the level 3 problem, which is where I would like to first remove the junk rows, whatever number of junk rows are there on the top, and then take that code and apply it to all of the 3 tables of the sheets right here. How do we do that is something that we will take a look. From here on, I would like to break my query and I'll start working with just one table. So let's just say go ahead and start working with 2009 table only. We will do some work to be able to modify this table and remove the junk rows on the top. And then whatever code we write, we'll apply to all the 3 tables right here, which is 8 table, 9 table, and 10 table. Should there be any other tables that come in the future, let's say 11 or 12 tables, it'll also be applied to those tables automatically. But first, let's just work with this particular table. So rather than actually working with the same query, I will duplicate the query and I'll start to separate my work out. So I'll just go right here in the query one, I'll right click and I'll say duplicate. The first query, I can call this as my combine data. And this is going to be my query one, which is just a test query that I'm trying to build so that I can test out my logic that I use to clean one of the sheets. So in the test query, I am actually going to go ahead and click on 2009 table. That data gets loaded, but there are a couple of junk steps right here. So I don't really want the change type yet. I don't want to promote any particular headers. I just want to take a look at the entire data of 2009, and that's the data that I have for 2009. Now, what I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to remove the 3 junk rows up on the top, but the problem is that I don't know that if the number 3 is going to remain static in the rest of the sheets as well. So I need to be able to do some modification to this so that the 3 becomes dynamic, or Power Query automatically realizes that, hey, I have to stop skipping or removing the junk rows up on the top till the time I get to this particular header, which is nothing but date. How do we do that? Now, the simplest and the fastest way to do that, if you are sure that column 1 is always going to be a date column, and that's where the headers are going to begin, then the fastest and the easiest way to do that is that you come to column 1, click right here, and then I'm just going to go ahead and select which nothing but date right here. Click on date, click on OK. Now this says, hey, column 1 is equals to date, but I will just change that to a not equals to date. That's one change that I will make. Date is removed, that is fine. But rather than actually writing the table.select rows function, which is selecting the rows, I want to skip the rows. So I will say, hey, I don't want to select the rows, but I want to skip the rows from this particular table, which is coming from the previous step. Good enough. And here is my condition of skipping. So if I now just maybe replace the table.select with table.skip, you're going to see that all the rows which were not equal to a date, they have been skipped. And as soon as you get the date as the first row, this is good to go. You can promote the headers and you are now good to go. Now, this was the logic if you are sure that in column 1, the first header is always going to be a date and you have hard coded that. But what if you are not really sure about that logic? How would you then handle, which brings us to a second level of complexity in removing the rows? I'm just going to let this solution be here and just replicate the step once again to show you in case you're not really sure about column 1. So let's just go ahead and click on the FX icon, which is going to make a new step. And this particular step, I will reference the table which had the junk rows up on the top. So if I just maybe go right here, you're going to see that we have all of these junk rows on the top, and this is the table that I will reference. So I will just go ahead and copy the name of this particular step, Control C, and come back right here and then paste that right here. Now, because this has got a special character, so I have to use the hash sign and the inverted commas to reference that particular step. Press enter and I have all the junk rows right here. Now, the logic that I'm trying to frame is something like this. I don't know what are the good headers. I'm not really sure of the headers, but I know for the fact that in case any of the rows, so let's say the first row contains a null, any of the row contains a null, that means it is not the header of the data. The header of the data will never ever contain a null. That's the logic that I'm trying to build. So To do that, I'm going to create a add column and a custom column right here and start to write my logic. So I'm going to go ahead and write an underscore right here, click on OK. And the underscore is nothing but fetch the row. That's what the underscore is. So you have fetched the first row, which has got the sales data in the first column and all of these nulls that you can see it right here. The second, the third, let me just collapse that right quickly. And then this is my legit header row, and that's where I have no null values. The only problem is that when you're working with a record, you just don't work with the values, you also get the names of the columns which are right here. So I don't want to work with the names of the columns, I just want to work with the values. So I'm going to go back to my formula. In the formula, I will say, hey, I want to go ahead and convert this record into a list. So record.toList is a function that I'm going to use, start the bracket, close the bracket. Press OK. I still get the very values, but the thing is that now the column headers are gone and I've just gotten the values of that particular row. Nice. In this list right here, I'm going to check for one simple check that, hey, do you have any null value? If you have any null value, you're useless to me and I would like you to be gone. So I'm going to go ahead and say something like list.contains. So I'll say, hey, list.contains, start the bracket. Here is my list, which I can see it right here. And does this contain a value called null as well in small case? And click on OK, and that gives me a bunch of trues and falses. Now all of these trues right here need to be removed, and all of the falses, like from the first false onwards, I would like to keep the rows. Now this is where I have not hard coded, but I have built a simple check that in case you have any one value null that is not a legit header, please remove that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe take this particular logic. So right from the each keyword up until the null brackets, I'd like to copy this logic, and this is the logic that will feed into my table.skip function rather than simple date checking logic that we built earlier. So what do? I'm going to maybe go ahead, and you can see that right now we are referring to the previous table which contained the junk rows up on the top, which is this particular table. On this table, I will start to write my table.skip function. So I'll say table.skip. Table.skip, first part is nothing but the table. Here is my table. And what's the logic to skip the rows? The logic to skip the rows is something that I've just copied, close the bracket and press enter, and the junk rows are removed. Now this is dynamic and you have not hard coded any columns values specifically. Now I will let both of these logics stay on the screen. So this is the logic which is where the date is hard coded. This is the logic which is dynamic and the date is not hard coded. Once you download the file, you'll be able to take a look at both of these logics. Nevertheless, we have the logics ready. Now it's the time to take these logics that we have built for one single sheet and apply it to the rest of the sheets as well. All right, I will move on from my test query to the combined data query, making sure that I copied this particular logic, which is something that I have written in custom one. So all of this logic that I have written to clean one single table, which is 2009 table, I'll copy that, Control C, and I'll go back to my combined data and I will apply that logic to this table, and this table. Let's just see how do we do that. So I'm going to go ahead and add a column, so custom column. And then I'm going to write that particular logic right here, just paste it. And in this logic, you're going to see that right now, table.skip function asks you, hey, what table would you like to work with? And earlier in my case, I was working with 2009 table, which was one of the steps. But this time, I don't really have a table as a step. This time, I have a table in the row of the column, which is where I can reference right here. I would like to reference right here, and I'd like to reference right here. These are the three tables that I'd like to clean. And all of these three tables are there in the data column. So rather than referring a step, I will delete this particular part carefully, and I would rather reference the data step right here or the data column right here, and that is going to be good to go. I'll click on OK. Now the difference between this table and the earlier table right here is that this table is going to contain the junk rows, and this table is not going to contain the junk rows. The only problem is that the headers are not promoted, so I need to promote the headers, take these headers to the first row as well, and let's just do that. So I'm going to go ahead in my formula once again. In the formula around the table.skip function, I'll say, hey, why don't you just also promote the headers so that I don't have to do that manually. So table.promote headers is the function. Start the bracket, close the bracket, make it as a wrapper function, click on OK. I still get a table, but the headers are nicely promoted right here. Now, from here, I can just go ahead and simply combine the data from all the sheets that I have, the sheets which are the valid sheets that I need. All right, the last step is to just append the data one below the other of the three tables that I have. This is my 2008 table, 9 table, and 10 table. I just want to append them one below the other. And there are two ways of doing that. Method number one is that I just care about the data. That means this data plus this data plus this data. I just want to kind of work with the data. That's one way of doing it. But sometimes people are going to ask you that not only do I want the data, which is all of these columns, but sure enough, I want to keep all of the names of the sheets as well as a ready reference. So how do I keep the names of the sheets and the data along? So what I can do is I can keep the name column, which I want to keep, and I can keep the custom column, which is the column that I have created. Right click and I'm going to say that remove other columns, and I'm just going to be left with the two columns. And now I can use this beautiful expand button that you must have clicked on a million times, and I'm just going to click right here. Now it gives me the option to pick up the columns that I would like to combine. And let's just say that I don't really want to combine the profit column. I can uncheck that, and from all the sheets 7, 8 and 9, I will get all the rest of the columns but not the profit column. Click on OK, and all the columns are good. The data has been combined, and I can happily load this data into my Excel. Now I know what you're thinking at this stage. What if the data of any of the sheets was inconsistent? That means you did not have the same names of the columns on every single sheet. How would you then combine the data? For which I'm going to lead you to one video that I have made, which you should watch immediately after this video. In case you're interested to join my courses and learn way further than just combining the data in Power Query, I'll welcome you to join my M course, and the link of that is also down in the description of the video.